Been one of those fun days.
Okay, we are recording.
Okay, Planning and Zoning Commission meeting calling to order at 5:26.
Is it?
No, really, it's 5:30.
Well, it says 41.
Okay, 5:31, excuse me. And we're gonna push the approval of minutes to the next,
No, you guys have
Okay,
one.
Okay, so if you would consider looking at over the December 4th, 2023 minutes, and get an approval, please.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of December 4th, as recorded.
One, can I get a second?
Second.
Wimberly, second.
Hi.
All in favor?
How are you?
Aye. Hey, Blaine. We just approved minutes. Okay, the next item on the agenda is items requiring no formal action. So at this time, we're going to do the presentation of the PNC training.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, so, I don't, I've been here, a little over a year now and, was that the first slide? No. Yeah, okay. But I wanted to take this opportunity to just go through a little bit of training. Now, there are, this was included in your packet. But there's 77 slides, so I would recommend that you kind of go through and look at those and review those. I'm gonna, do some highlighting as we go through the slide, but I thought that would really set the stage as we move into the next presentation, which is basically a draft of the comprehensive development documents. We and I'll go in more of this when I introduce Ken and Dalton. They're with public management, they're grant consultants, and we have a grant for a planning grant, which is $55,000, and that was to basically update our comprehensive development plan. And they're going to talk more about that when we get there, but this kind of helps set the stage for what y'all's role is and what y'all's purpose is and how you make decisions and that sort of thing. So, an overview of topics, we're going to talk about zoning and land use, the role of P&Z Commission, and then the legal issues of zoning, plating and the plating process, and the legal issues of plating, and then conflicts of interest. So when it comes to zoning, land use, just a brief history. Zoning generally refers to a city's comprehensive regulation of uses of land within the city. The word zoning is derived from the practice of dividing a map into zones, also called districts, and designating specific permitted land uses within each zone. So the purpose of zoning is to segregate land uses that are thought to be incompatible, industrial and residential. A city zoning authority is governed by the chapter 211 of the Texas Local Government Code. Just keep in mind, cities, counties, school districts are all political subdivisions of the state, and they've been given different powers of self-regulation. We are a home rule city, which means we met a population of 5,000, and then we took a vote to become a home rule city back in the day. What that does, you have general law city, let me just back up a little bit, general law city and home rule city. Home rule cities basically create a charter, and they can essentially create ordinances. And as long as the state doesn't prohibit them from doing it, they can create stricter regulations through the charter. Whereas general law, they don't have that ordinance making capacity.
So that's good on our behalf, Brett.
I'm sorry.
That's good on our behalf.
Yeah. So the governing body of a municipality may divide the municipality into districts. to a number, shape, and size the governing body considers best for carrying out the subchapter. Within each district, the governing body may regulate the erection, construction, reconstruction, alteration, repair, or use of buildings and other structures or land. So zoning authority, cities have the power to enact zoning ordinances for the purpose of promoting the public health, safety, morals, or general welfare, and protecting and preserving places and areas of historical, cultural, and architectural importance and significance. So why zoning? So we use this as an example, Farben did, because you have that, by a mall. You don't want a SOB, which is what, sexually oriented business, next to a school, right, or a church. So here you got that, and then you got, Kinderland, so these are the things you can regulate, in zoning and land use. So the height and the number of stories and the size of buildings or other structures, the percentage of a lot that may be occupied, the size of the yards, courts, and other open spaces, population density, the location and use of buildings, other structures and land for business, industrial, residential, and other purposes, and the pumping, extraction, and use of groundwater by persons other than retail public entities. So that's just, another picture. So zoning regulations must be adopted in accordance with comprehensive plans that have been adopted by a municipality. And they must be designated to lessen congestion in the streets. These are the purposes, right? So promote health and general welfare, provide adequate light and air, prevent overcrowding of land, avoid undue concentration of population, or facilitate the adequate provision of transportation, water, sewer, schools, parks, and other public requirements. So the actual plan, not required in Texas chapter, that's chapter 13. So it's giving you the, the designations of where that is. But if adopted, zoning matters should comply with the comprehensive plan. And that's the court case that talks about that. So what is a comprehensive plan? Well, it's a long-range plan intended to direct the growth and physical development of a community over time. So the comprehensive planning should be future-oriented, continuous, based on present and projected conditions, and comprehensive. And it may be multiple documents. And this will be good information for you to have because we're going to get into this later with him. So here you see two guys in the valley, and oh, that'll be a great place to put a nice city. So what is a comprehensive plan? It's the projection of a city's vision for what the city should look like and how the city should be developed over time. So how you lay it out, where you put the land uses, how you arrange that, essentially, in short. The governing body of a municipality may adopt a comprehensive plan for long-range development of the municipality. And it may include provisions on land use, transportation, public facilities, may be contained in more than one document. And it may be used to coordinate and guide the establishment of development regulations. So this is an example, and you'll see an example tonight of, this is just an example of a future land use plan, but you'll see ours tonight, a draft of ours. So the role of planning and zoning commission, the commission shall recommend boundaries for the original zoning districts and appropriate zoning regulations for each district. The discretion, the general rule is that there's broad legislative discretion is afforded to local governments in zoning matters. So it's the presumption of validity, and that validity is defined. Unconstitutional only if shown to bear no relationship to securing public safety, health, morals, or welfare, and clearly arbitrary and unreasonable. So those, that would be unconstitutional. You have to tie, as long as you can tie the decisions to these reasons and this rationale and that justification, then that would be okay. A zoning map shows the current designation of permitted land uses for land within the corporate boundaries of the city. And then the text, the regulations tells what the restrictions apply in each district. So hopefully you've gone and you've looked at our ordinances and you've seen our zoning ordinance and how those are all laid out. Again, this is just, now this is our current zoning map. And this is it online? It is online, yeah. And it's online, just so you guys know, it's under resources.
I think it's.
And I believe it's the About tab. If you go to our website, it's under the, I'll send you the link and how to get there. You probably know, you probably found it. But I'll send you that so you guys will know. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time here, but I mean, this just tells the types of zoning. So this pyramid zoning that it references is that all uses in more restricted zones allowed in less restricted zones. And that's what we have here, and it's evident when you read our zoning ordinances. So industrial, commercial, multifamily, single family, those are common. A lot of cities will break up, commercial into, heavy commercial, light commercial, retail, general business, so there might be other subdivisions under some of these. On industrial, heavy industrial, light industrial, and then they'll define what that is. Commercial uses are permitted in industrial district, but industrial uses are not permitted in commercial district. So that's what that pyramid zoning means. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Exclusive zoning, only named uses allowed. So straight zoning, these are standard regulations of land uses. You have planned unit development, and this is zoning that may be permitted for specific types of mixed uses. So it's tailored for a specific type of use, and it requires a site plan approval. So what I like to explain it as, it's almost like you look at our zoning ordinance on a planned unit development, and it's almost like a smorgasbord. So, I mean, it's usually a negotiated thing that you're working with the developer on. Staff is working with the developer to try to figure what that is and then bring it to you guys. But
Like a planned development,
pardon?
like a development.
Right, it's a
Housing.
planned development, yeah. And so you can say, okay, they want some mixed use, they want some commercial, they want some residential, they want some multifamily. And they put it together, again, kind of like a smorgasbord. And as long as there is a whole process, and it can be somewhat convoluted. And I hope that we're making ours simple, because like I was in another city and it was very,
It's pretty, yeah, it'll just say plan development, it's not on the map at first, and then this is where you kind of come in.
right,
They'll bring it here first, and you look at the plan of the developer and you go, okay, and then it moves on through the process of back to council.
yeah. And so, but I mean, some of that approval process can be cumbersome. And so, one city that I was in, the most recent one, it's very cumbersome and it was very confusing. So we wanna make it easy. We do want to promote business development, right? I think generally, and we don't wanna make it hard for people. But anyway, so that's what, and I've had this conversation with Ken on this as well. So overlay districts, I mean, that's like a historical district or like a downtown development district, are examples of what an overlay district is. So historical, and you can have historical too, but, the transit oriented district, so that's basically when, you've got, are you guys, I mean, Dallas has some, you know, by Mockingbird. Louisville has one, you know, they've got, basically when it's transit oriented, when they've got trains that are coming in and going there, and then they do, it's like a mixed use, it's almost like a planned, but it's planned around transit. So trains that go through there. And so it's very specific for that. But it's kind of like a planned development, but it has a component of transit in it. So the enforcement of the zoning ordinance, I mean, there are fines, you know, and there's civil injunctions and, so there is enforcement powers, to the zoning. So again, you guys, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends boundaries. I think we already talked about that for each district. The tools of the subdivision regulations, the zoning ordinance and the zoning map and the comprehensive plan, those all work together. So your preliminary report is when you hold a public hearing, and then you make a recommendation to the governing body, which in our case is the city commission. The final report basically just means a motion to recommend approval or denial of whatever that request is for the zoning. So the role of city staff, you know, that we receive and process all the application requests for zoning changes, determine if a request is right for consideration by P and Z, prepare and post agendas for the meetings, communicate with P and Z members regarding locations, dates, and times of any special meetings, provide you guys with information about the agendas, the applications, and the related information, and to advise the P and Z members. The zoning practice, the owner may request a zoning change, do not rezone property so that it cannot be economically developed. There's no requirement the property be zoned for highest and best use. No right of landowner to have property zoned for the greatest profitability. Underlying theory of zoning is compatibility. And what they mean by that is when you're looking at the criteria for making a decision, you're looking at the surrounding uses. Is it compatible? Because remember, it's broken up by industrial, commercial, single family, that sort of thing. So the Supreme Court has recommended 4 guidelines. You know, respect the comprehensive development plan. So if it's in line with that, and that's why you have a plan that it can be public and everybody knows what that is. Consider impact on surrounding properties of that compatibility, and the suitability of land as presently zoned. And consider the relationship to public health, safety, and general welfare. So are we protecting or preserving historical, architectural, or cultural places? You know, those types of questions. So there's a public hearing. We mail notices to property owners within 200 feet. We have a newspaper publication of that hearing, and there's a certain amount of time. It's 15 days, I believe, 10 days, 15 days that it's got to be in there. Protest 20% requires 3. So if there's 20% that are objecting to it, then it requires 3/4 vote of the council. Plan development, I mean, types of zoning cases, again, this is what makes that, how you do that. Zoning may be permitted for specific types of mixed uses, essentially negotiated, development or regulating the plan or site plan, and the development plans are required. And then basically when you guys approve the site plan, you approved everything within that. So if something was left out, so for example, I'll give a situation we had in Rome, the city I was at before. They had a planned district, and they didn't include that the utilities would be underground. They didn't specify. So, I mean, they could be underground or above ground. Now, if they would have said in the plan development that they had to be underground, then it, it would have been required. But if you leave that out, that's why it really is, you gotta pay attention to the details when you're doing these plan developments. Because if you leave something out, then you've left it out, and that's what they got, because that is the zoning. And again, it's smorgasbord, right? You're picking what is in the zoning ordinance. And it can be negotiated. So even if the ordinance says, and this is what happened actually in Rome, I mean, it did say that they, that utilities would be put underground. But if you negotiate that you allow them above ground, then that becomes a part of the zoning, and that can be included in the zoning. Special use permit, I think you guys are probably pretty familiar with that. Those are just additional uses allowed in the district after review of conditions by P&Z and the council, city commission. It is an amendment of the zoning ordinance, and legislative conditions may be placed on SUPs. So not to have an adverse effect on surrounding properties. It's consistent with the purpose of the zoning district. Variance, the zoning board of adjustment considers these. It allows quasi judicial variance of regulations on how, among other things, an unnecessary hardship. Hardship cannot be economic. So, yeah, we've had that instance since I've been here. Variance of text regulations, not uses. They should be granted sparingly. So, I don't know that that's been the case here. But there's criteria, so there's very specific criteria. Zoning exceptions, non-conforming uses, this is basically created when the existence of a condition or use prohibited by a restriction contained in the zoning ordinance predates the effective date of the restriction. So for instance, let's just say we've got our existing land use map, right, our existing zoning. With the future zoning that we're going to designate, there's going to be legal, by that very action, there will be legal non-conforming uses created. As long as they continue, so let's say there's a house on 180. Let's say we designate everything as commercial on 180 from here to here. But there's houses along there. As long as, let's say they sell a house, if somebody buys that and they move in and they keep using it as a house, that's fine, it's a legal non-conforming. But if somebody buys that and then they change it and they open up a business, then they can no longer go back to housing. And so it changes when we have and he'll get into this, but when we have our future land use map, I mean, that's gonna happen over time. And in high growth communities, it happens quicker. But in slower growing communities, like I think we are growing, and I think we will continue to see growth in the future, but it's gonna be slower than what you're seeing in the metropolitan area. Does that make sense on the non-conforming use? So it's considered to be grandfathered. I mean, I've gone back and forth with attorneys on that. No attorneys in the room, right? I think it's funny that he put it in here, this was our city attorney, Carvin. He didn't like that term, but he put it in the presentation. So a status of non-conforming use may be lost if the use is abandoned or if there's a material change in the property. Structure is substantially damaged by weather, for instance. So amortization, I mean, that's kind of a thing, we don't really need to get into that, but that's subject, that's a zoning board of adjustments issue. So this is illegal zoning, spot zoning, contract zoning, conditional zoning, legal alternative to contract zoning is what the conditional zoning is. So just be aware of what is illegal and what's not. It occurs when the city council promises to make zoning change in the future regarding the development of property. So for example, if the developer agrees to purchase property zoned industrial for use as a mall, if the city would agree to rezone the property to commercial to permit the construction of the mall. kind of the chicken before the egg thing.
And that's happened here in the past too.
I'm sorry?
That happens here too.
Contract, well, and here's the thing, stuff could happen that's illegal, but I mean, it's always a risk benefit analysis, right? And so, you know, we don't want to put the city at risk of being sued. And so we want you guys to, you know what you're doing and act in legal ways and reduce the risk of that sort of thing. So it can be avoided through the use of special use permits, variances, or plan development district regulations. So there's unconstitutional zoning decisions. I mean, they can, you know, be held to violate the Constitution if they're deemed arbitrary, unreasonable, or unrelated to a legitimate police power, which is that broad statement of protection of public safety, health, and welfare. Okay, so these are permissible factors to consider when making a zoning decision. So the need to allow for circulation of air and light, the need to separate structures to avoid fire hazards, the need to lessen the congestion in traffic, the need to separate incompatible uses of property, the impact of density on the infrastructure, utilities, schools, and other community facilities, the need to preserve property values, the need to preserve neighborhood boundaries and the character of the neighborhood, the need to implement the city's future land use plan, the need to protect historical structures or architecturally significant structures or places, the need to protect or preserve the environment, the need to maintain a good aesthetic appearance if it is one of multiple factors. These are special use regulations. So the sale of alcohol, SOBs, group homes, Fair Housing Act, HUD, manufactured housing, government entities, oil and gas drilling, and pawn shops. I think in our history, it's interesting. One of the things I learned, I mean, Breckenridge is one of the few towns that allow the drilling inside the city limits, and that's because of our history. You know, it's a boom town. So regulation of SOBs, I mean, they're very specific. They can't be zoned out entirely, and they're controlled through content neutral zoning. And essentially is what you do is you can't zone them out, but you can create it to where you're creating a space where you want them to be, essentially. Zoning Board of Adjustments, again, just there are specific statutory functions, and I know Malcolm likes to refer to that. So there are variances to the zoning ordinance, there are special exceptions, appeal of zoning officials' decisions, additional functions. We won't get into some of these because it really doesn't pertain to you, but so plating versus zoning. I think this is important to note. On zoning, it regulates how the land is used. It's legislative and discretionary. You are making the law, again, as long as it complies with those ideas that the Supreme Court, you know, looked at, compatible land uses and stuff like that. Plating, what that does, it divides the land into lots, provides for streets and utilities. It's quasi judicial and it's ministerial. So does it comply with the law? So when you're looking at a plat, as long as it checks all the boxes, you have to approve it. I mean, it's not arbitrary, as long as it is meeting, you know, that. Does that make sense? So it's geographical description that aids in recording and the deed description. Zoning regulates how land is used. Plating serves to divide land into marketable parcels. Plating regulations concern planning for future infrastructure. And and what is required in a plat. Remember, it's a subdivision of land. So if you have 10 acres and you're subdividing it, or you could be taking two pieces of property and putting them together and joining it, and that would be a replat as well, because they're probably already platted, right? And then you would, so it's a legal description of the land. So if you're gonna join two pieces of property, that would be a replat. So it's required when an owner of a tract divides the tract into two or more parts or combines them. To lay out a subdivision, suburban or building lots, to lay out streets, parks, squares, or to be dedicated to the public. So it's not always a big subdivision, right? A big developer. I mean, it can be one or two, like, 3 acres and you're dividing it into three lots. So the plat content, I mean, the dedication of streets and easements, donation of public facilities, parkland dedication, public street frontage for all the lots, building setback lines, meets and bounds, description of the property. You're looking at, utilities, easements, those sorts of things that are there. And this is just an example of one. I know it's not a close-up or anything. So the platting process, they must be acted on within 30 days after filing, and that's a legislation that happened about 3-4 years ago. They required that. And the filing is the submission of the plat, essentially. So if the commission does not act on that plat within 30 days, it is deemed approved. The filing of a preliminary plat may trigger the 30-day period. And we'll go into that. So basically just, we need to process those. So there might be special meetings called to accommodate the timing. A continuance requires consent. Generally, plats must be approved if all applicable standards are met. Again, it's that ministerial function. So that's just, again, talking about the municipal authority responsible for approving plats must approve a plat or a replat that is required to be prepared under the subchapter that satisfies all applicable regulations, and then the city is not liable for negligence in the plat approval process. So preliminary versus final. Preliminary plats allow city staff, P&Z, council to look at particular issues. It looks at the lot layout, dedications, utilities, and infrastructure. Only the final plat is actually filed with the county. The processing of plants, again, it's approved by P&Z, approval of city council. No public hearing is required unless the property is being replatted. So these are generally the types of plats. I mean, you've got minor plats, amending plats. Scrivener is a scribe, right? So if something, basically it's a typo almost. You could look at it. Requires replats require public hearing, may not remove any covenants or restrictions, requires notice it's zoned for 1 or 2 family dwellings. And then vacating plats, which I think you guys did one a couple years ago.
I think downtown, right?
Blackboard?
Yes.
Yeah. So the enforcement of plats, refuse to serve or allow connection to water, electricity, or other utilities. I mean, that's one way to enforce, enjoying the landowner's operations, recovery of damage from landowner and amount necessary to bring landowner into compliance, criminal penalty for violation of the ordinance, civil penalties, legal uses. I'm not going to get into these too much. I would, impact fees. I mean, a lot of times, cities require parkland dedication. So if there's a big subdivision, 10% of the land has to be dedicated to green space park that they dedicate to the city, or 5%, 10% probably high. Impact fees are essentially charging that developer for the cost of the infrastructure, basically. I mean, it's, easy way to put it. But there's a way that you have to go about implementing impact fees. And I don't believe we have impact fees here. We had just put them in Rome when I was there, for water, wastewater. And here, just, there's some legal issues, if you want to get into that, you can read your packets. Conflict of interest, I mean, a person does have a conflict of interest when his or her professional judgment or decision-making process is influenced by a secondary interest, usually monetary. So keep that in mind. I mean, if you or your family member has any ownership interest in property that is subject of a P&Z action item, or if you live within the 200 feet of such property, that you might have a conflict of interest. So like if we're doing a public hearing and you receive one of those 200-foot notices, that might be something that you want to go ahead and do, recuse yourself from the vote. So, if you have a question on that, just let us know and we can answer that, or we can get with our attorney and make sure. So, again, if you do have a conflict of interest, you let us know before the vote or decision happens, and then abstain, you recuse yourself from the voting, which is abstain from further participation. It is a, class A misdemeanor, maximum fine of $4,000. So we're up to a year in jail. Should not vote, basically these are practical, should not vote on matters regarding subdivision where the city official resides. So again, if you are within the 200 foot, you receive the notice, that might be one to not vote on. But you should never abstain merely to avoid a controversial issue. So there is confidential information, you guys need to be aware of it. So, chapter 39 talks about using confidential information to gain benefit or advantage for him or herself or others. Prohibition consists of only of information that has not been made public. So information that was learned in an executive session, for example, 3rd-degree felony. So that was it in a nutshell. But hopefully that gives you some, I know some of you have been on the committee for a while, and I don't know, maybe you've gotten some training in the past, but I thought it would be a good review, even if you had, at least, and have this in your mind, especially as Ken and Dalton get into presenting the draft comprehensive. And this is a draft, there'll be several more iterations, so they'll talk about that. So this is Ken again and Dalton, they're with public management. They're grant consultants on this project, so I'm gonna let them take it over.
I'll give a couple of things and then I'm gonna let Dalton get into this. So we're talking about, y'all talking about SOBs, she was talking about SOBs, but there's one way you can do that is you put them in a zone that they don't want to be in. And so typically they won't come here. Right? That's one way you can handle that. And be careful with special use permits. I've seen cities, everything that comes before P&Z gets approved. And next thing you know, the entire ordinance is, there's special use permits all over the city. Okay. So you just, it kind of weakens your ordinance. Just keep those things in mind. So Cynthia mentioned the comprehensive plan. It's a grant the city received for $55,000 a year back, something like that. And its comprehensive plan is made up of a series of plans, the way we're looking at it. So we're going to look at housing, population, land use. Spent a lot of time talking about that already. Parks and recreation. That's kind of what we have tonight. We're going to give you a high level kind of overview of where we're at and what we've come up with. And then we have an engineer working on the streets, the water, the sewer, and the drainage. And hopefully by next meeting next month, we'll have those put into this. So we'll be able to show you those parts of the plan as well. And so literally when Cynthia's talking about you're matching your zoning ordinance with your comp plan, it's really the future land use map is the nuts and bolts of what you're trying to, because you've done all your planning, you've looked at the future land use map, and you say, okay, that's what we think we're going to look like in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so you kind of make your zoning decisions along the way. You don't want to make a decision and amend your ordinance to allow businesses to come into an established single family neighborhood. That's the main protection that zoning offers those single family homes. Okay. So I'm going to let Dalton get into where, our presentation here.
All right, so I'm gonna start off with housing. So this map here was created from us driving around, actually looking at every single structure in the city. And, you know, categorizing it based on if it's a single family home, manufactured home, commercial, multifamily. And we gave it a grade, condition grade based on just a windshield survey. And so as you can see, there's some areas in town. If it has this black dot in it, that means it was abandoned or dilapidated at the time, vacant. Red is, you know, poor condition, blue is deteriorated, and green is good.
Yeah, we just trying to show you where, this is a good tool, this will be a good tool for, your code enforcement and building officials, and y'all already know. We did look at we're incorporating the surveys and all the work you guys were doing last year. And substandard housing was number one, kind of, when it comes to housing, number one issue that the community, that everybody participated in the survey were looking.
Well, the city, as you guys probably know, the city has been fairly proactive in addressing substandard houses. And even, I mean, I think there was a lull for a little bit right before I got here, you know, they were doing, you know, kind of rocking and rolling, and then there was kind of a lull, and since I've been here, we picked up again. So I think since we've had like 2 or 3 rounds.
2 rounds, we're getting ready for
Yeah,
the
third round.
It was pretty substantial when she showed me the list of what you guys are
Yeah.
doing.
Third round of what?
For the council, the city commission to declare homes, dangerous buildings.
That is a process, which this is why it takes a while for just, they can't just go out there and go, oh, this is a really bad property. It's been deteriorated or abandoned for a long time. There's a legal process that all these notices and things before it can actually be removed. So
And the
that-
reason why is because, I mean, you know, we are in America
Yeah.
and we, you know, value private property
Right,
rights.
right.
But then you come down to the general health and safety and welfare of a community. And you look at what constitutes a dangerous building.
Yeah.
And it all has to do with those items.
But yeah, if it's been abandoned and it's deteriorated, it's fallen down, kids could be in there playing around in that thing, you know, and so that's why it gives the city the authority to go through the process of. And the whoever owns the property has been notified along the way multiple times.
And a lot of them, we don't know how to get hold of people. We send letters, it comes back, they don't,
Are we allowed to ask any
they're just
questions during the process?
absentee.
Are we, they said I could ask a question. The house next to the Griffiths Oil Company and 2 down from the car wash that's owned by that
Rose Harrison,
has she been, the city processes after
not
the
yet.
house has been burned out for years?
But it's.
Well,
way worse.
So so when you look at, I thought you meant, yeah, so you're, and you can ask that question, but, part of it is resources.
Well, I
You
wasn't
know,
condemning nobody, I was just asking, is that,
Yeah.
you know, that.
well, right, but I mean, that is part of the challenge,
Because
though,
I've dealt
what I'm
with her
just trying
and
to
tried to,
tell
you
you,
know.
is that it's just having the resources, and in fact, we don't, I mean, you guys know Malcolm, I mean, he's our fire chief.
Yes, I
He's our building inspector and he's our code enforcement officer, right? And so one of my goals, I mean, we had that strategic planning, just so you guys hear this from me. We had that strategic planning when I got here last September, of 22, in the fall. And then a community, you know, meeting and a survey and all of that. So we could all really kind of get on the same page of what are the priorities, because there's always gonna be priorities. And dealing with substandard houses is a big priority. You know, investing in our employees has been a big priority. We've made progress on that front, you know, getting the pay up. And, you know, we still need to make process on that, but a budget is always, you know, kind of cyclical. So we address this and then we address this. So I will say we need a code enforcement officer. And that's gonna be one of my priorities going into this next budget, so that we can increase the number of hours, resources that we put towards beautifying Breckenridge, which is not just dangerous buildings. I mean, that's code enforcement, junk, high grass, I mean, grass clippings in the street, you know, all of those sorts of things.
And another thing too is the city will have all of this data. And so as far as tackling substandard housing moving forward, you can kind of plan out that high target areas need to be addressed, and move forward from there. The big takeaway from this survey that I want y'all to look at is the occupied structures. So this is what we have identified through being boots on the ground as 2,324. This is the baseline for our population, projections. So here we have some census data. The 2020 census is reliably, or not very reliable. And we've seen that across the state. Communities have notoriously been undercounting. So, as we get into population next section, you'll see occupied houses are a big component. Housing needs, substandard housing, obviously, age of housing stock. So the city, and I can get down to this, there's a larger version right here in a minute. The majority of city's houses were built 1960, 1979 and prior. Obviously, this is something that will continue to change over time as more development comes in and older homes are remodeled. But that's a key takeaway. Housing rehabilitation as well, like Cynthia just addressed, the code inspector, building inspector. And then here's our goals and objectives. So first, improve the quality of living. Breckenridge residents continue efforts to mitigate and remove substandard housing. Consider use of various federal, state housing programs. So home program through TDHCA will rebuild substandard homes, housing preservation grants, and some other Section 504 programs. Strong code enforcement, promote continuing education for staff. Consider outreach programs community-wide, and consider periodic meetings to ensure that all staff are enforcing the code consistently. And goal 3, increase city stock of quality, affordable, single-family units. Like I said, this will continue to evolve over time. This is part of that substandard. Consider acquisition of vacant structures to sell these properties for minimal cost to redevelopers. As the city takes down substandard homes and obtains those lots, they could be sold off for potential development. Make sure that homeowners are,
Well, I'm sorry, on that point, so that is what we are doing. Now, some of the ones that we have acquired through those that have gone through being declared a substandard building, right, and it's been demolished. They've been in the floodplain, or, they're really can't be redeveloped. So there are some that are coming up that are not. And that's what we will do, is we'll have sealed bids for those properties so that we can get them back into the private sector. So that, that we've got, there's several people that are building homes in the community, and you guys know who they are.
Those are just the ones that people sign over to us.
Right.
There's several that we're trying to get, they won't sign them over. If we tear them down, we have to pay out of pocket to go to Abilene, which is very expensive.
Yeah.
And then we put a lien on it, and it sits there vacant property, just in limbo.
Yeah.
Still needs to
there's-
be mowed and.
Yeah.
Is that like the house that is right behind my property on Harding? Cause I know the city owns it.
Yeah, we were trying to go after that substandard, and the county sold it to those people, cause it's old back Texas.
Good Lord.
So, yeah, and
I
there's
mean,
a
it's
lot-
just,
yeah.
we got a lot of angles that we have to work in.
There's always, if it's in tax trust, it's doing nobody any good. It's not doing you any good. It's not doing the school any good, because it means they haven't paid. And it's just on a roll right of tax trust. But and this requires the city to have to work with there's at least 3 entities involved. We've got the school districts involved, and the county, and in order to get it out of there, it's got to come into one entity. Then it's can be sold to somebody.
And we have a good
Actually put a
relationship
house
like
on it.
that. We do have that relationship, but
It's just getting that
It
communication.
is a process.
it is a communication for the county. Hey, if this is done, let us look at, let's see if we can tear it down. And the entities, they sign it over to us and we clean it up. We can use our model field, because it's right here, and our own people can do it.
If you get one house back on the roll, tax trust is just a number. It's, we all know it's just sitting there but you're not getting value on it. I mean, there's a value attached to it, but it's not producing value actively, right? The minute you get another house on there, now all 3 entities, whoever taxing entities are in there now, they're collecting again on it. So that's what this is. The overall goal is, as Cynthia mentioned, is to get them back into a productive life. And shoot, it could even
Get
be,
some, if you're rebuilding them, they've been sitting vacant for a while, but you are doing a good job adding value to them.
exactly.
And then going forward, like I said, just continue strong building code enforcement.
One thing I'll amend after listening to you, we need to add in code enforcement officer so we can give you some help. Right? Okay, so anyway, I'm gonna amend that part to actively hire a code enforcement officer.
So getting into the population, so this is the current trend. This is based on census data. This is not our projections. This is the age of housing units again.
That first one, go back up, Dalton. The first map is basically your population change from 2000 to 2020 based on census data.
Yeah.
So you can see we're at 5868, went down to 5435. It's only 400 people, but it shows it from 2020, 2000 to 2020 based on census data. Okay.
So getting a lot of this data is required by the grant to be in the, this is a lot of census data, get into the demographics, again, all census data. So getting to existing population estimates. So as I said, we counted 2,324 occupied dwelling units. 2021 census had 1,963. We used the 2.64 persons per household, and multiplied it, and that's how we got to our, current population estimate of 6,200.
Yeah, when you see the number 2021 census, what it is they always do, the official census was 2020, but there's always data they're doing extrapolation of data in the 2021 is the most current one that had come out. They do like what's called 5-year estimates. So that's where we got that persons per household from.
But the 62 is probably more realistic,
I was gonna say,
because
that's
people aren't being counted in the census, and like he mentioned before, they're seeing it across, and not just Texas, it's really across the whole United States. And I think it's just people are averse to, responding, to that census request, for lots of different reasons, so.
Getting into future populations, so we used a linear progression of population from 2020 to 2023 to get the maximum, and the minimum estimate here was based on Texas Water Development Board. So we have a maximum of by 2040 of 9,500 and a minimum of 7,500. So we do see y'all growing, not like since it's not a high growth area, but we do show that y'all are growing.
It's a positive trend. I mean, it's showing positive trend, especially from what we saw on the ground.
So getting into land use, so this is the existing land use map. This was derived from that structure survey that we did.
Yeah, real quick on this, there's gonna be terms floated about here, this is not your zoning map. This is an existing land use map based on what we saw on the ground when we went around and counted all the houses and what the land use was, okay?
Yeah. So yellow, we have single family home, brown is manufactured home, red is commercial. This kind of salmon color here, this is multifamily housing. A lot of that is your affordable housing units. And then blue is public. This could be school property, city-owned property, or another county property. In green, we have recreational, and that's about it. So some of this up here, we label as commercial just time. I believe a lot of this is industrial. That's kind of subjective. Like I said, these are all windshield surveys just based on us driving around. These are some of the numbers. So we have vacant land. We have 431 acres of vacant land throughout the city limits. Some of that you'll see is in the floodplain and floodway. This is data we got from the engineer. Total acreage 2,687.8 acres. You see a majority of that single family home, 505 acres of commercial. This industrial, like I said, this number is probably a little bit higher because it's commercial here. Public, and then parks and recreation will have about 24.6 acres in here. So these are some, we have single family. This is what we would consider a standard, high quality home. Commercial and then parks.
It was.
So looking at some different transportation facilities, obviously y'all have 180, 183, these are major, thoroughfares through town. 287 is another one, north-south, and then 3099. Here, these are just different soil characteristics.
Yeah, it's required. They always ask me about this, required. Yeah. It's something that, it really, if you look at the map, it shows you where your county is and what is typically this area used for. As far as what the soil composition is.
So getting in, so this is the future land use map. You'll notice this goes out into the ETJ. City cannot zone into the ETJ, but the future land use map does show a projection of what we estimate it to be. So
But, yeah, I was gonna say, okay.
Define ETJ.
Extraterritorial jurisdiction. In your case, you get a mile because you've got 5,000 people, right? Cynthia mentioned 5,000 is a magic number. You get to go to home rule. And you get to go from a half mile, which is what everybody, even the little guys get a half mile. As long as they're not infringing on another ETJ. These ETJ rules were established in the 90s, I guess, somewhere around there. One of the important things, but you've got a mile, and if you get up, the big boys got 5 mile. I mean, there's bigger, really big ETJs out there. Since there's really no one around you that's impeding you guys, let's just say you guys, were annexing out past your city limits. Your ETJ would expand with that,
A mile, you said.
yeah, and so it's potential for your ETJ to grow. That doesn't happen in DFW area. That's all kind of landlocked, right? They do a bunch of trades between each city, like, okay, if you want that in your ETJ, and we'll trade you out. What is the ETJ for? 2 things Dalton was just getting into. The subdivision regulations that Cynthia talked about earlier. You can enforce the city subdivision regulations in your ETJ, as opposed to everyone else in the county that's not in a city. There's county subdivision regulations, usually fairly weak. They're just, if you pay, 10, could be 10 pages long. It just says each lot has to be this much, blah, blah, blah. You have to have, they don't get into the details. Of
Yeah, so I'm sorry. So in, I believe it was 2005, it was in the mid-2000s where there was legislation, House Bill 1440, where they required the city and the county to determine who was gonna regulate who was gonna regulate the growth in the ETJ areas. So, all of that stuff that you can regulate, because cities have, more stricter environments. A lot of cities took that on themselves. And in fact, I saw a thing where we did, and I don't know if we're overseeing any, but because we were required to get an agreement with the county, who's gonna regulate the
development.
ETJ, the development in the ETJ, and so we took that on ourselves, but I don't know, this is an area of research I'm looking at. I don't know if we're actually doing.
Yeah, I've
that.
actually had to go back to some of my smaller communities because they didn't want to deal with it. They actually have to go back and take action to work with the county to take action to get it back in their hands. Unless they're happy with the county's subdivision regulations.
And so, anyway, the reasons why you do that, and then,
Yeah, and then the other thing it's for is you cannot annex outside. First of all, you can only annex next to, adjacent to your city limits, and the area has to be in your ETJ. So the main functions of that ETJ were this development, the subdivision regulations, and the ability.
but we can no longer annex. I mean, the only annexation that's taking place anymore is voluntary. So cities used to have the ability to involuntarily annex areas, but we don't have that, meaning add to their territory. We don't have that capability anymore. It's gotta be voluntary.
But it could be as easy as you got a commercial development that wants your water and your sewer, right?
Well, right, and that's
Come
what
into the
happened
city.
with Walmart. Okay,
Yeah.
so that land, when was that added?
15.
So they wanted water and sewer, and we can provide water and sewer.
Is that right
outside
there in
the
that
city
little
limits,
red?
But it's,
Yeah, right there.
but it's a higher expense, ongoing. So that is kind of a carrot, if you will, for
Yeah.
people.
It's kind of like, and Dalton was just getting to this, but it's really the only ordinance that you guys have that you can enforce outside your city limits, because your zoning's not, even though this is a future land use map, it plans out into the ETJ, but we cannot zone out there, right? We could say, we would love to see this area red along a commercial along the highway out there. But we don't have any enforcement really with the zoning until they're brought into the city limits.
It's kind of a quasi, I mean, I'm a particular about, and the reason is because those people in the ETJ area, they can't vote for the city council people. So there's no representation.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, just a fundamental, component of American government. So, but what it does do, it does allow us to somewhat have a buffer area of quasi regulation of development at a very high level, so that if and when it became in the city limits, it wouldn't be a big mess. And you have that situation in Dallas, in the Dallas area, in Louisville, Lake Louisville. For instance, there were several cities around Lake Louisville, and you had, and it really, like Hubbard Creek, okay? And so there's no regulations out there. I mean, you can put it whatever you want. It can be a mobile home, it's just, right? And then you had those that were annexing these substandard according to cities. And it was a big adjustment for these cities to annex these areas where streets weren't, they weren't defined. They were gravel, they were dirt streets, it was just.
Yeah, 2-inch water lines and.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. So
The infrastructure.
once you annex it, it's now your problem.
Right, and then you're required then
Yeah,
to,
then
within
that's,
so long
exactly.
to
So
provide
this is
that.
why they allow you to enforce your subdivision regulations in the UK. So that when you bring it in, it had already gone through you guys and you already knew it was a good development. So
probably more information than you want.
yeah, sorry.
I think
All
it's
right,
good for you guys to.
Exactly.
So a lot of, I'm gonna turn this later off so y'all can see. A lot of this, we'll have probably more commercial along 180 as we discussed earlier. Some of this was left because it was existing. But you can see a lot of, vacant lots. We assume they're gonna be single family. We've kind of created some more confined zones for manufactured homes in these areas. And then these areas, as you can see, are, if it's red and it's hashed, this is floodway, not floodplain, but floodway. This is pretty substantial area for a city. Obviously that prohibits a lot of building and a lot of additional requirements. So we want to make sure y'all were aware of this on here. And really, this is where P&Z's input and comments are, would be local knowledge of what's going on and what you anticipate. Some of these developments out here, typically we see commercial along the highways, usually a couple single family developments pop in behind those when you have, people that have land and then they pass, their kids get it, they sell it off or whatever. I know y'all aren't growing quickly, but as development continues to move west, eventually I think y'all will see it. So especially with, all the recreational opportunities y'all have around here between Hubbard Creek and Possum Kingdom and everything else. I could see larger lot communities moving into the ETJ. So.
Right, well, and typically, when you look at, and you see it there, but 183, is this the future or existing?
yeah, it's just future. You can zoom
Okay,
in. Don't-
so, we probably need to adjust that a little bit, I would say, but, 183 and 180, there still is single family on there, it's farther out, but, is that realistic? When you look at 180 on a single family, that's where you're talking about compatibility. Now, obviously, the speed limit is reduced, but that's the main thoroughfare through the town. And so typically those are gonna be, more retail. I say, again, commercial can be broken down into retail too, but.
And typically with the future land use map, we do not break it into that. We just kind of are a little more broad. But when you get into zoning, obviously you can have several levels of commercial, but for this purposes, it's really for planning purposes on what you're hoping, a picture of what Breckenridge will look like in 15, 20 years, however, whatever that time frame is. And this would be the basis of you doing a new zoning map. And this would be what they would say, hey, does it match, or at least kind of look like what you when you're doing a zoning change or something, is that what you had? This is your planning part of what you were thinking when you're making decisions on, doing rezones and things like that, or even just creating a new zoning map.
Well, and it is interesting to note that, I mean, different communities, develop differently, but bigger communities, I mean, right now you're concentrating commercial along, the higher traffic areas, right, where you've got a lot of visibility. But in, the metropolitan area, you're gonna have those areas where you have, I mean, they are subdivisions, but they'll be the highest level of retail, like a gas station or a neighborhood store, in a residential area so that they can, go shopping. Now there are, you've seen these cases in the Dallas DFW area, of a Walmart going in, to a primarily neighborhood area, and people don't like that. But some people do, so, I mean, Walmart's kind of a big sample, but usually kind of the pocket, retail stores, like a gas station or a little convenience store, you will see that breakdown in communities in the metropolitan area. And here.
And
not
we'll
so much,
get you
because
a
we're not very
PDF, a
big.
copy of this map to you, and they can send it out to you.
Yeah,
And we can also provide this interactive link that y'all can do and look around. So going into the land use plan, unless y'all have any other questions about future land use map. Goal one is just, continue to improve the infrastructure based on the plan that y'all are gonna see from the engineer, hopefully this next. You wanna make sure that your water, wastewater, streets, your drainage are all, in place and prepared for the growth that's coming. Different methods for financing.
I'm sorry, I am gonna touch on that a little bit, because that's a big problem, and the reason, we're a boom town. So in the, 20s, 30s, 40s, we went from 5 to 30,000, right? And so we have the infrastructure to match. And that is like 80 miles of water line, 45 miles of gravity sewer line. And yet now our population has steadily decreased. But we still have that infrastructure in the ground. And so it's 100 years old in a lot of places. And we have that financial responsibility to, increase that, to replace that and repair. We've got that aging infrastructure. And so that's difficult when the population has gone down. But now everything needs to be replaced, and it's infrastructure for a population of 30,000. So that's the challenge that we have in Breckenridge, which is huge, because you're talking, again, we just did some high level, in our strategic planning, but a mile, of water line is, $1.2 million. Well, that's 80 times 1.2 million, just there, just high level. And then on the gravity lines, 45, I mean, it's, 1.5, on our city streets and drainage. We haven't even really addressed drainage, and that needs to be addressed, because you see the floodway that we have in our town. So I just point that out. I mean, it all works together, but the challenge is great. I mean, we're making progress. We've gotten some grants through TWDB. We're going out for more. And those projects are in development now, but I mean, even that, when you talk about 80 miles, it's a drop in the bucket as far as what we need. So it's just gonna take time. It's tall order.
And it's all right, and you can see the timeline for this is through the entire planning, time or phase of this, 2023, 2040, that's when this plan runs. And then, ideally, this is updated before 2040 or around that time, as changes happen, you wanna, once this, I believe you said the last one was 1960s, yeah. So once this plan
It's
is,
long overdue.
yeah, once these plans in place, you wanna continue to update it and maintain. So some of the funding opportunities for those infrastructure, we have Texas Texas Community Development Block Grant. This is through TDA. This is usually anywhere from $350,000 to $500,000. Obviously smaller scale projects, and these are also in low income areas. Texas Water Development Board is where you'll tackle your larger water, wastewater projects. Those are loans, but they're, sometimes you can qualify for loan forgiveness.
Which we did on this last round. Some of it were low interest rate loans, and then some was loan forgiveness,
This,
which is like a grant.
yeah, the money she's talking about, you can't tackle all of that. The grants that we get through CDBG is more to supplement what you're already doing, because those are $500,000 grants. You heard the numbers she just said. When you're looking for millions of dollars, Water Development Board is probably your best bet right now. And then you get into like certificates of obligation and things like that. Usually that's why streets and parks and stuff are lumped into like COs, because at least with water and sewer, you have an avenue to go to get these funds.
And we were able, I think you guys know this, if you don't, so we were able to do some COs last year. And so we got about $8.3 million, and that is primarily for street improvements. But there's a smaller amount going for parks and a smaller amount going for public works facilities. Now that can, it can change within that, but they were authorized, these COs were authorized with all three uses. Again, the lion's share is going for street and drainage improvements. And we're gonna start seeing, we've been talking about those, so you're gonna start seeing those improvements. The improvements that you've seen thus far were actually funded in large part through the quarter-cent sales tax that we've been collecting for street improvements. So on Rose and Elliott and Seventh.
So goal number 2, kind of going back to what we've discussed a lot, aesthetically pleasing, durable, safe living environment, strong code enforcement, adopting of a zoning ordinance to, hopefully build towards this picture of what the P and Z and what the city is envisioning the city will look like, adopt subdivision regulations to give you another tool, and continue to clear unsightly, dilapidated buildings, more substandard housing. Goal number 3, preserve open spaces with current within corporate limits. Strictly enforce the city's subdivision ordinance to ensure that future development provides provision for public spaces. Designate natural areas, parks. We want to continue to try to grow that number of acreage you'll have in open space and green space. And encourage development of projects that provide beneficial economic opportunities for local residents without destroying existing physical environments. So, incentives such as tax breaks and development agreements to encourage businesses to invest in the city of Breckenridge. Promote public and private sector economic development. We're doing a downtown project right now. It's hopefully going to go and help with economic development around the square.
So one of the ways cities can do that. We can do 380 agreements, but we do have an EDC. They get a half% of the sales tax. And so that is the organization the city has, tasked, if you will, with those sorts of things, even though the city can do development agreements as well.
So moving on from land use, we have recreation open space. So as we were driving around looking at structures, we also drove around all the parks and just kind of did an inventory. Now this is dated since the new playground has gone in. But large pavilion, small pavilion, we looked at skate park, the walking trail, this is a pretty substantial park with a lot of amenities. Booker T. Washington, some older playground equipment here, slide, some older basketball goals, a small pavilion, picnic benches. Lake Daniel, you have some primitive camping out here, and I believe 3 boat ramps. You have Bird House Park here in town, lots of bird houses, look at a variety of bird species, benches. Foundation Park, which there was, I believe, improvements to the fountain.
Very nice.
Turf area, and I believe you said that mural is going to be updated soon?
Yes, it will be.
And community gardens, you have garden beds and just kind
And
of.
the murals is an EDC project.
Okay.
So the other is through the COs.
So this is kind of a breakdown of y'all's current level of service. Y'all are slightly less acreage as far as neighborhood parks, community parks, park system in general. Now, this is accounting for city-owned parks. This is not accounting for all the, small, privately owned at some of the housing.
If you were to add all that in, and technically, the people of Breckenridge are using all of these facilities. So this is just a way to kind of give Parks and Wildlife that we've gone and looked at the needs assessment so that when we apply for park grants, that they'll know that y'all go through this planning process. Okay?
And as far as future levels, really, the main need is just more trails throughout, if y'all can connect some.
I think, one of the things we talked about with Booker T is maybe adding a little trail system. It's a small part, but it's kind of separated where you got the equipment over here and some kind of a practice fields over here and just kind of connecting that together. And that, that's something that we could apply to, Parks and Wildlife to help, see if we could get a grant to do those improvements.
There's some historical value there too.
Mhm.
Yeah, it'd be a good little project.
And then just long-term, some kind of larger indoor recreation center, the target's 1 per 20,000, obviously y'all are always.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of those things, y'all may never get around to that, it just.
Those pictures ain't that old.
Well, yeah, these, got off y'all's Facebook, so these are, as y'all were doing these, laying the turf, new playground, this is before the shade went up, which looks really nice, that went out there today. And also a sand volleyball court and, dog park are planned for later this year as well. So some of our priorities is, at Breckenridge City Park, install a new splash pad, so the possibility of submitting a Texas Parks and Wildlife application this next cycle around August.
What we're planning on is the baby pool that's out there to repurpose that as a splash pad.
It's very popular with Parks and Wildlife, we've seen a lot of those getting funded lately.
I'll see them all over. Yeah.
And they're also a big draw from other communities, a lot of people
And
will travel.
usually, yeah, we've had several of our communities that did that, and they're starting to see people coming from surrounding areas.
Yeah. So they'll come for the day, play splash pad, eat lunch here, just
Yeah.
boost the economic. And then replace outdated equipment, obviously that's kind of ongoing right now, and upgrade landscaping. Some finance, they're estimating this cost around 800,000 total. City funds, private donations, Texas Parks and Wildlife grant are some of the financial resources for that. Booker T. Washington, add covered bleachers to this baseball field here, replace some of the outdated metal equipment, maybe with some newer playground equipment, add a small walking trail and replace some of the, dated park benches and picnic tables. That's a lower cost, depending on the size of that playground equipment, this could vary. Same thing, city funds, donations. And
Yeah, I think the strategy we're talking about is, this year, trying to submit an application for the large program that they have to go after the Breckenridge City Park, and then maybe next year go after a small community grant for the, for Booker T, right?
So improvements to Lake Daniel, so this is install 2 boat docks, construct restrooms, construct RV spots, and install playground. I believe, the discussion that was, so y'all could eventually start charging, for those camp spots and.
Yeah, so sorry, so we have been, looking at a 5-year plan for Lake Daniels as a resource that we have here locally. And so this is one way to do it. So if we install some amenities like the boat docks, construct restrooms, RV spots, we could, potentially, charge for overnight stays. And we would have, a park attendant out there that would have a housing unit, to be out there checking people and they're checking people in. So this is a plan that we put together that we haven't yet presented, by the way, to city commission, so you guys are the first that are seeing that.
Good idea, we can do something with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there, we need to make something.
It's a good resource, it really
It's
is.
a good resource.
Yeah.
So for priority 4, we have future gardens. This is replace some of those garden beds, install a new gravel drive, install, greenhouses potentially. That could be a real good opportunity for local youth to get involved there, or, other, garden organizations. Obviously, that's a lower threshold depending on how far you want to take those improvements.
But one of the uses, and we talked about this recently, is partnering, with other people. So the Methodist Church, they had done it before, but, they have a food bank. And, so they're gonna be starting their, community garden in that space again, because there's a big need for not only food, but also fresh food. And so that's a great partnership with the city, a church that's, basically a food bank for the city. Yeah.
And, a lot of this, depending on what's being done, this could also be done with volunteer labor to really shave down that cost. And then a couple final priorities, this is just, establish neighborhood parks as subdivisions come in, you wanna make sure, like Cynthia was talking about, dedicate land for parks. And then, designate natural areas and continue to kind of bolster y'all's park system.
And what you're looking at is a high level kind of, there's more words and chapters.
Yes,
Or there's a lot more to this, and we'll get a draft to you guys, but we didn't want to read through
So you're gonna send us this?
We'll send you this, plus when we get those 4 chapters, they're pretty well written. We'll send you the whole text to it that y'all can look through it, but like I said, we didn't want to have y'all have to read through 100 pages of stuff, so.
a lot of,
We'll be adding, like I said, there's those 4 chapters there, but we're also gonna be adding in, when the engineer gets done with streets, water, that'll be put into the overall document, which is what's gonna create your comp plan, okay?
and
So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, a lot of what makes up that document is also grant required, so there's a lot of census charts.
Yeah,
and
you'll
things
see,
like
yeah,
that
you will
that
see some stuff,
were
and
omitted from
yeah,
this, just.
and you'll say, what is that for? So, well, that's what, the money comes from HUD and filters down through the state. And you guys have a contract with the state.
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
No,
I missed that.
no, I
Okay,
mean, y'all's contract is with TDA. The
Yes.
city's contract is with TDA.
Yes.
So we're hopeful to have engineer here by this time next month, and then that way we should have the whole thing put together, and then we would move it from this body over to council so that they could review, and then they would adopt.
These things you talked about.
Yeah, what our plan is, we're creating a new subdivision zone and zoning ordinance, but we're gonna get this plan finished and finalized and sent to TDA so that they can approve it and move on. And then we're gonna come back later and walk you through the process of adopting zoning. Okay, so we'll have the ordinance written, which is all that the grant is requiring, but then we'll come back later and walk, because the process of adopting a new zoning ordinance is, there's a lot
Yeah.
that'll be going on. A lot of notifications, public hearing, and it starts in this body. We'll move through this body, the development, and then you'll make a recommendation.
Realistically, what's the time frame for that to take place?
After, you mean getting a new
Getting
ordinance
zoning,
adopted?
yeah.
I would say 6 months. Just be-
I thought it was.
I mean, I'm saying 6 months. It depends on if everybody's kind of, we like the direction we're going, and there's not a lot of back and forth, and we're pretty happy with.
We don't want to hurry the process, but
Right.
we also don't want to, hold back, right? And we've got, there is growth happening, and it works better when people know what to expect. And so we haven't had one since 67. We need to update it. Again, we don't want to shortchange the process, but we also, this should have been done,
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Prime example, what's happened over the last 2 or 3 years, would have been nice if this had been done and completed 4 years ago with the growth that took place a couple years ago.
right.
Yeah, because
And he doesn't have, you don't have to go through that.
as Cynthia mentioned, everything that's occurring right now will not be subject to the new zoning ordinance, right? Because as she mentioned, we're gonna lay a new zoning ordinance on, there's gonna be a lot of non-conforming uses that are just gonna have. There is one thing I wanted to mention. There are separate laws for manufactured homes. We mentioned that the use changes because of weather. If a storm completely demolishes a manufactured home, they get to replace it one time, regardless of what we've zoned it for. So, yeah. But once it gets out of tune the next time. So in other words, it could be 20 years before that land use changes, right? Before you see what you've planned for, it may be 10, 15 years down the road before. Unless, their home gets destroyed and they want to put a house there, that'd be great. Assuming
It
it's,
happens over
For
time,
example.
but.
yeah, it does take time. But what you were just saying, if you could go back and we would have done this, then these changes would already start taking place. And it just takes a while to realize what you've got and to realize what you've got on this future land use map, which is, once again, we talked about 3 maps of the existing land use map is really just for us to show you what's there now. This future land use map is what we're gonna base the next zoning map on, Other than we won't be showing out in the ETJ. That's for our purposes and the city's purposes, right?
Yeah.
So we can't zone in the ETJ, but we can plan in the ETJ, and that's what we're doing. Okay?
And another thing also, when you're looking at these, when you scroll through these maps, if you have them on your own, is this is a snapshot of when we were here, like early 2023.
The existing.
Yeah, the existing. So, some of those changes things may have changed since we've done this survey, so just keep that in mind.
And
But
the houses too, yeah.
Yeah, so, if someone was remodeling a house or constructed a house, that might not be on there. I know a lot of, some substandard homes have been removed, so some of those might be incorrect now.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
Any
Thank-
other questions or comments from y'all?
and of course,
Do
the
you have
utility,
anything to do with the FEMA flood maps? Ours haven't been updated since 81, I believe. Y'all have anything on that?
no, then this is a sticky subject because
Yeah.
and the reason I
Some
say
people buy
that is
property in
because,
that area and they get so mad at us, no, you can't build there. They,
well, it could get worse. The people that have been surveyed, most of the communities I dealt with, they redid them, I think I want to say 09, somewhere around there, they started redoing, and it got worse. Meaning more properties were now in the floodplain, right? So be careful what you ask for, because it's probably not gonna go the other way.
yeah.
They also, in what we're calling West Texas, most of my clients they've never been surveyed.
Wow. It
No,
does surprise me.
Yeah,
I mean,
because-
because it's a tall order. I mean, when you look at the size of Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't understand how big Texas is.
and we're dealing with a lot of cities that, or and even counties that they're not, there's not a lot of flooding
Most
that
of the
occurs out there.
population is along, I don't remember what the latest figures
Yeah.
are, but along the I-35
Right.
corridor.
And so, and then I guess FEMA had just finally made a decision that they hardly ever flood out there, so they're like, we all know it all comes at once, right? You get all your 15, 20 inches all at the same time, right?
Some years apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate y'all's time.
Well, I know, I appreciate y'all's attention. I know this probably, hopefully haven't been too boring because it is, important, but, it is dry, I will say, but it is important to a community. So what y'all do, we appreciate you volunteering your time and, it's important, so thank you.
So that's what our goal would be to aim for about this time next month to finish up with the engineering, and if y'all are good with it, we can move it on to council. And we'll send you this presentation, we'll get it to y'all, and and that y'all could, if you have the presentation, it's just a link, then you'll be able to look at all
Yeah,
that.
I have the link.
Okay, yeah,
Thank you.
it should be, you'll be able to go into the
It's the
maps like,
same-
and they're kind of interactive, so
Good.
you'll be able to look at especially housing and the parks and the feature land use maps. You can turn off layers and things like that, so, okay?
so, yeah,
Okay, we're gonna adjourn and it is 6:59.
We almost got out in an hour. All right, thanks, Scott, it was nice meeting y'all.
you guys appreciate
Thank you
it.
guys for y'all.
Appreciate it.
Y'all have a good night.
I can, thank you.
Thank you.